So in the second part of the first critique, in a part called the dialectic, he sets out to do some work on how some of our erroneous beliefs emerge. So it's part of what he says about the limitations of knowledge, that we only have knowledge properly, or wissen, when we have an intuition and a concept. Something, in terms of resistance and intelligibility, something given and a meeting of that which is given, where what we know is always on this side of our reception of it. And so he looks at some of the traditional arguments for the existence of the soul and the existence of God and some other cosmological problems. And in each case says where he thinks we have a concept at work but without any disciplining experience. And where this happens, Kant wants to deny knowledge. Famously then, in this part of the first critique, Kant does demolish three traditional arguments for the existence of God. The ontological argument, the argument from cosmology, or the cosmological argument, and the argument from design. I think perhaps what's more interesting about these arguments than any of the details of his Kant's refutation is that he offers more or less identical refutations of these arguments in his pre-critical work. Nothing has changed here. So in 1763, he denies the ontological argument for similar reasons that he does in the first critique, and the cosmological and the design argument. Briefly, to say something about each of those, the ontological argument goes from the concept of perfection, says God is a being no greater than which can be conceived, to say that if you've understood the meaning of that concept, you've understood that that concept must exist. What Kant says in the first critique is that existence isn't a property of things, it just establishes whether or not those things exist at all. Already in 1763, he'd argued against the ontological proof for the existence of God. And the way he does it there is to say what constitutes the properties of a thing is its essence, those possibilities which constitute the essence of, say, a human being. And they reside in the divine understanding. The divine will determines whether or not those things exist. And that's why existence isn't a property of the essence, because existence is bestowed by the divine will. So there's an interesting theological origin for his critique of the ontological argument. His critique of the other two arguments can be very succinctly put. In 1760, he worries that they work by assuming that you would expect matter to be chaotic. So you have to invoke some sort of interventionist designer to stop it being chaotic. And his argument in 1760 is that, well, no, matter is already informed by the rational structure, which depends upon the divine understanding. So matter just behaves lawfully and regularly, so there's no need to invoke an interventionist designer. And there are traces of these critiques right in the first critique. But in any case, what matters most is that Kant in this period does not simply demolish arguments for the existence of God. He demolishes arguments to knowledge on both sides. So he says in the first critique, on both sides of the atheism-theism dispute, there is only boasting and sarcasm. And there's one particular part of the first critique, the dialectic of the first critique, which is going to be of central importance to his moral philosophy. And that's a part known as the third antinomy. The antinomies are where he presents arguments on one side and then the other and says they both seem equally plausible, what are we going to do about it? This particular antinomy works along these lines. He says, on the one hand, we can put forward a convincing argument that everything is deterministic. That's the space of nature. Everything is deterministic, there's no freedom. But on the other hand, we can put forward an argument for freedom, as being, freedom here means being fundamentally a first cause, which gives rise to a series of actions which then come about. And his response to this is very interesting, because it's precisely one of these explorations into the realm of the ways in which things might be.